All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming out here tonight. Especially want to thank Mike for allowing us to have this press conference here at his home on River Trail. River Trail, as many people know, has been severely affected by floods over the last 3 or 4 years, and a lot of us, our hearts go out to the people along River Trail who've experienced this. And the reason we're here tonight is to talk about our 7th position paper, which is about emergency response. And we all know that emergency response is very dependent on 2 things. The first is preparedness, and the second is practice. And that's why in this 7th position paper, we want to focus particularly on the area of communications. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that our first responders, whether it's police, fire department, ambulance, as well as many of the people in town hall, and I would want to recognize Jennifer Naylor, who's done a phenomenal job in responding to the emergencies and dealing with all of the residents under very trying situations. All of them have done a phenomenal job in responding. But one area that I feel we've come up short is in the area of communicating, both prior to, during, and after the emergencies that have befallen us. And the problem here is that poor communications can undermine what is basically an excellent response from an operational and logistics point of view. Unfortunately, communications is often seen as an after effect or something not worthy of a lot of attention. I know from my own experience with ExxonMobil, where very often we didn't pay a lot of attention to communications. We were very good on the engineering part, but not as diligent in the early 80s or in the 80s about the communication part. So we've been tested as Southbury by the emergencies that have been falling on us, and I think we've learned a lot. I think we saw the latter responses were better from a standpoint of communication than the prior ones. But what concerns me now that for many of us in Southbury these memories have faded, although I don't think they have for people living along here of River Trail and other streets that were severely affected, is that we've not really incorporated important learnings about preparation and practice for effective communication. And that's specifically what I was trying to target in this 7th position paper. And the areas that I think we need to address, the first one is, as defined in our own communication plan, or the town's communication plan, we need prescripted, approved communications, including press releases, public announcements, and web content that we have to have ready to go once an event is about to take place, as well as during and after that event. From the best that I can find, we have not incorporated that into our communication plan to date. Even though it calls for them, they're not available. And the last thing you want to do under an emergency situation is look at a blank piece of paper and say, I've got to write something now, when you're trying to do many, many other things, whether it's dealing with phone calls, people coming to speak to you, or dealing with logistical activities. So having prescripted information gives you the ability to have something to start working with, edit from there, and move forward. The second is an emergency response handbook. We have a very comprehensive and complete plan. I haven't counted all the pages, but my guess is it's over 100 pages. It's not the kind of thing somebody carries around in their briefcase all the time. What we need is something much more condensed that has the essential information you need at the very beginning of an emergency. Things like contact names and contact information regarding the emergency responders' names, their phone numbers, their email addresses. All of that should be at your fingertips. What you as a particular responder are authorized to do, so we know who's got what level of authority to make what kind of pronouncements, and other essential information for calling out on an emergency. And the third is a commitment to periodic practice to call outs of the team and to see that we can be called out quickly and effectively, and we know what our responsibilities are when we respond. It's important not only because it tests us, but it also develops trust amongst a team that really goes beyond just employees of the town to the many volunteers, nonprofit groups that are all involved in helping respond to an emergency. So I'll be glad to answer questions about the position paper, but I did want to make 2 observations before we turn it over to Donna to make a few other comments. Good communication planning is not only a part of emergency response, it's part of any initiative. I've heard a lot as a candidate of both sides about what happened at Bates Rock Road. And although there's differences of opinions, what should have happened, what shouldn't have happened, What most everybody agrees on is it wasn't communicated effectively. People were not informed ahead of time of what was going to happen, why it was going to happen, and, if you will, what their options were as far as providing input. So I would say that the same rules of being forthright and proactive in your communications is essential not only for emergencies, but for any activity that the town undertakes. And the other thing is, I'm very proud of the way our campaign has effectively communicated the ideas and positions that we've tried to put forward. So if people ask, why do I think our team could do better at communications, I would say to them, look at the way we've conducted our campaign. And I think you see that we not only talk the talk, but we walk the talk. And so with that, I'm going to ask Donna, who's had some personal experiences, to make a few comments.
I really just want to reiterate what Ed said about communications. Drew and I lived in Missouri in 1993 when our floodwaters came up so high that we had 2.5 feet of water in our house. One of the really essential things that we noticed was communication, both good and bad. It was really important for us to know which way the water was going, coming up, going down, what the weather was doing, what our neighbors were doing. And without good communication, that made it much more difficult for us to manage our flood situation. My heart goes out to these people on this street. This is just really a heartbreak to see. And not that good communication could have stopped the water coming up, but what we want is to be able to be prepared in case of disaster, and that, I think, is the most important thing that we can do.
Okay, with that, let me just introduce Doug Ziemke, who's here, part of our team, running for the Board of Finance. And I just asked him to stand up here, so I don't, I don't want to put him on the spot. But if there's something you'd like to add?
No, I think you guys said it perfect.
So now we'll just open it up to questions from the press, as well as anybody else who has a question about our position paper. Well, I thought the first question would be from the press, but if they're not going to jump up, Bob, you're probably going to.
Question for you. As chairman of Lake Zor Authority, we've been having.
Would you mind, just because we're trying to tape it, so better chance that maybe it'll be heard.
All right. As chairman of the Lake Zor Authority, we've been having communication issues with First Light, who takes care of the dam on Lake Zor, both of them, be it the Chippewa and the Stevenson.
Right.
Under an Edelson administration, would you be willing to put a little bit more pressure on First Light to assist and relieve the people of Southbury, Middlebury, Oxford, and Newtown, and having them draw the lake down?
Well, it just seems like, I mean, I understood that a lot of the lake was going to be taken down, and I guess what we were a little surprised about is Lake Zor did not come down as much as we had heard in the, at least what I thought I picked up in the emergency planning meeting that took place before the tropical storm Irene came forward. You know, I have one adage which says make your friends before you need them, and so my point would be you want to work with people like First Light early in the administration, develop the relationships. I've got, without saying things that I really am not in a position to commit to, I want to understand what their restrictions are, and then make sure that we push them as hard as we can to do things that are the benefit of the people surrounding the lake. But it's something I would have to look into before I really make a commitment. But I definitely would want to work with them and make them part of our team. I did not notice, and I could be wrong about this, that they were with us when we did the planning or the pre-meeting before the tropical storm Irene came through. I don't think they were in the room. I could be wrong. I know they were there for the after-action report, but I'd want to make sure they were there for the beginning. If not, you know, directly, then I'd go back to something we've talked about before in this campaign, and that's effective use of technology. It's always hard to get everybody in a room at the same time, but you know, with tools like Skype and teleconferencing, not everybody physically has to be there. And so if the excuse is, well, we have so many other towns, First Light's excuses, we had to be in Newtown, we had to be in Shelton, we had to be here and there. Well, there are other ways to kind of work that with using technology effectively to make sure they're, if not physically present, at least virtually present.
Okay, thank you.
Ed, you mentioned on the website, in the position paper, there was a plan or something that was, communication was cited as a weakness in 2008. Who cited that?
Okay, in 2008 we did an emergency response exercise for the towns of Southbury, Woodbury, and Bethlehem. the scenario was a very, very severe drought, which might sound ironic since we seem to be talking about floods, but the principles are the same. And in that, we simulated a series of 9 months that had gone by without any rain. And so not only were people out of water, we had fire situations, we had agricultural situations that became worse and worse for the towns. And one of the things that the professionals who ran that exercise noted was when it came to communicating, when they went to those plans, when the people responsible for emergency response went to those plans to say, what do we do, there really wasn't much there for them to work with. And that was identified at that point, that the need for a risk plan or risk communication plan, I think is specifically what it was called, with pre-scripted information was something people needed to work on. And that was one of the recommendations. Now again, it is in our plan for the town of Southbury to have pre-scripted press releases, but to the best of my knowledge, as of, let's say, a couple of weeks ago, those did not exist. That doesn't mean maybe it's happened since then, but they clearly were not there, let's say, for the hurricane, the tropical storm, and it clearly was one of the key recommendations of that after-action report that was shared with the 3 towns back in 2008.
But who did that report?
Well, it was sponsored by the Pomperaug River Watershed Coalition. I was the executive director at that time. We received a grant to do this work from the state's, oh boy, I'd have to think of the name of the group, but it's associated with the University of Connecticut. I think it's, I have to get back to you, but the footnote on the position paper identifies who were the people who did the program or who did the exercise, as well as the funding organization who was interested in doing this. And by the way, we took the results of that and we went all over the state to present that, because the DEP and the State Water Authority said this was a very important message to get out to all towns and communities in Connecticut. So I don't want to make it sound like we're the only ones who are not doing as well as we should. There are many communities in Southbury, and typically it's our smaller communities that don't have all of the infrastructure and the resources that a Bridgeport would have, or Hartford. Although maybe I'd be surprised what I'd find in Hartford and Bridgeport, so maybe I should not be so convinced that they're in good shape.
What kind of communication have you identified that's been lacking? I can tell you, but what have you identified that's been lacking? Go back as far as March if you'd like, or we could talk about Irene and Lee. But I mean, March was, you know, I mean, as we look at these storms that came at it, and all 3 were the perfect storm. You know,
Yep.
3 500-year storms in 6 months. So, what communication do you envision first and foremost that would be most beneficial to me?
Yeah.
What's in it for me?
Right. Well, excellent question. Yeah, actually, today I had an interesting conversation with James Belden of the Pomperaug River Watershed Coalition. So therefore, the first thing that comes to me is we've got to prepare all of ourselves. You know, I think one of the things that we're seeing with emergency preparedness is a little bit too much reliance on government. You know, as someone who enjoys history, if you go back 100 years, people never even thought to come to government to respond to an emergency. That was your problem. You took care of yourself. It's only recently, I'd say in the last 30 years, that we've really come to see governments as playing a very, very effective role in emergencies. Some they've done better than others. I lived through Hurricane Andrew, saw a lot of things that had to be learned in that. Many of us witnessed what happened with New Orleans. But we have to do a better job of getting people to realize that those first 3 days of any emergency, especially a natural disaster like the floods we've had, people need to be prepared themselves. So that's something that's got to be constantly reiterated. Everybody's got to take responsibility for themselves. And we've got to be careful that we don't get people, if you will, kind of feeling like, well, I don't have to worry about this because the government will come in and take care of it. So that's an ongoing message. But then there's effectively communicating good information in a timely way about what's happening with regard to impending weather conditions, whether it's hurricanes, whether it's severe snowstorms, or any other natural calamity. Let's remember that, we should also be prepared for a lot of, let's say, man-made disasters that can happen very quickly. A rollover on 84 that spills chlorine gas very quickly has all of the implications for this community that a flooding river that comes up suddenly on us has. So there are all kinds of things we've got to be ready for. But we got to get out information as timely as we can, and that means having a prepared workforce that realizes they've all got that communication responsibility. It's not just the First Selectman, but it's got to be the whole team that's looking out there and saying, what do I need to know, or what does the community need to know, and what are the tools that we have to get that out? We have Code Red. We've got to keep working at that to make sure more and more people are connected to that. But we've got to make sure we know how to get information out on that quickly. Then it's during the event. And I think a lot of us felt that more information could have been forthcoming. And you've got to use so many different tools. The observation about a lot of disasters is, especially natural ones, and again, Hurricane Andrew, we saw this, where at first all the news reports were, it's not a problem. Nobody seems to have a problem. The hurricane went through, nobody's reporting a problem. Well, that's because the people who got hit can't report the problem. They have no electricity, they have no telephone, they have no way of getting out of their house. So you got to always think about other methods other than the ones we use every day, like our telephones and our email, to communicate. That depends on the event. So that's the next level of important communication of how to not only deliver that, which gets difficult during an emergency, but trying to make sure you've got the right messages. That was another thing we really focused on with the exercise in 2008, is coordination between the towns. The worst thing that can happen is one town is saying it's no problem, and the other town is saying it's a severe problem, and people are caught in the middle saying, well who's right here? Not just to tell personal stories, but I also lived through, you might not want me for First Selectman if you hear the things I've lived through, but the volcano, Mount St. Helen. I lived through that, and where we lived, we didn't have a local television. And it seemed all the TV stations I turned to, each one told me to do something different. Turned to one station, they said, stay inside, don't go out. The other one said, go outside, it's okay. And you sort of, as a individual, sort of left wondering, well, what's the right thing to do? Wash off your car, don't touch your car. All these mixed messages. So there's another level, depending on the nature of the event, that requires coordination. And then the last stage is afterwards. What can we do to respond and mitigate the impact of the disaster? And there again, I think we saw some mixed messages here because we weren't really sure what we could do as a town, what we were willing to do as a town, and that should have been thought about ahead of time, I believe. But regardless of the pre-planning, then make sure you get out an effective message, especially to the people who are most directly affected. So hopefully that answers the kinds of communications. I think it's a very, again, I go back to something I said at the beginning. A lot of people take communication for granted. That's just something we all do. But communicating is something that needs deliberate planning, just like building a building, or just like building a dam. It's got to be thought through what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to communicate, and then thinking about how you communicate that. Long answer, sorry. Something I'm a little passionate about. Any other questions? All right, well, I would say again, I thank everybody for coming down tonight. I encourage you to read the position paper. And as I say, I'm always looking for feedback on it, whether you think it makes sense, needs to be improved, there are things we've forgotten. So I encourage everybody in Southbury to look at it and give us their thoughts. And thank you to Donna and to Doug for being here with me tonight. Thank you.
Thanks.